Yeah, give me 1 second.
Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapidam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasti Gaura Bhaktavrinda Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Name Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prasharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachatisatarine. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremest human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance of classes on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. And loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental song, is established as an irrevocable fact. I ask for your blessings today as I attempt to highlight some important parts of the first chapter. As Gaurakumar stated a moment ago, there is so much packed into the 12 cantos of the Bhagavatam. And I hope that through Krishna, I can share some of that with you as well, more importantly with myself. While I was researching and listening and reading over this last week, I learned a lot, and some things I didn't know before, and things that I had heard before, but wasn't really sure of. So hopefully tonight will be enlightening for me as well as for all of you. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Looks good. Can you see the PowerPoint, the presentation?
Yes, Prabhu, it's clear.
Great. Okay. So Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1. As I think most of us are aware or know that the Srimad Bhagavatam is presented in the form of conversation. Primarily, the conversations are between Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. Shukadev Goswami being the son of Vyasadeva, and Parikshit Maharaj, the grandson of Arjuna. And Parikshit Maharaj found out he had 7 days left to live, and he wanted to find out how he should prepare to die. And so he sought out Shukadev Goswami and asked him to give him his teachings. And so that was the original conversation. And here in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a retelling of that conversation. So that conversation of Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj really starts at the end of the first canto and goes all the way throughout the 12 cantos. So the beginning, the first 11 or so chapters of Canto 1 are kind of the build up to that conversation. So there's a conversation within a conversation. And the first time I read the first few cantos of the Bhagavatam, I was very confused, because if you weren't paying close attention, at least sometimes I wasn't, I would always I'd stop and wait, who's talking? Because sometimes there's conversations between Krishna and Brahma, sometimes between Brahma and Narad. There's questions between Vidura and Maitreya, and so many other questions going on. But the original conversation between Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj is what's being told in this Bhagavatam. We'll see in a moment in the outline of the first chapter how the sages at Naimishrayana came together to ask questions from Sutta Goswami, who was present at that original conversation. And according to what I was able to find in the Padma Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam is actually Lord Krishna in the written form in the book. So the first 2 cantos are the lotus feet of Krishna. The third and fourth cantos are his thighs. The 5th canto is his navel. The 6th is his chest. The 7th and 8th cantos are his arms. The 9th canto is his throat. The 10th canto is his beautiful lotus face. The 11th canto is his forehead, and the 12th canto is his head in totality. And so in the same way that when we go to the temple and we see the deities and we worship the deities, we start by looking at the feet of the deities and slowly, gradually, piece by piece, moving up the body until we reach the face. That same way is how we need to approach the Srimad Bhagavatam, starting at the beginning. Prabhupada many times chastises people who jump directly to the 10th canto to try to see the face of Krishna, because the information that's in that chapter, or the canto, the stories in there are very difficult to understand if you haven't progressed through the previous cantos. So in that same way, when you enter the temple, it's a little rude to look and worship Krishna directly in the face before you've made your way up from his lotus feet. So this series, when you proposed this, Gaurakumar, I was very excited to be able to present on the first chapter of the first canto, because there's so much, as you said, so much in this entire 12 cantos, but just within the first verse of the first canto of the first chapter, there's so much. I'm sure that hours and hours could be spent just analyzing the first few lines. So chapter 1 is entitled Questions by the Sages. And from what I saw and what I was able to understand from others who had spoken on this topic, there are about 4 or so different sections or categories that you can look at within the first chapter to see how it's broken down. So it starts off, the first few verses start off by introducing the Srimad Bhagavatam, what it is. Then the next couple of verses set the stage for where this is taking place. The next few verses are about glorifying the speaker of the Bhagavatam. And then finally, the last major portion of chapter 1, primarily the majority of it, are the questions that the sages ask to Sutta Goswami. So before I start by breaking down these different sections and the verses that I felt were most important for tonight, I wanted to share a story that I heard from Mataji. Her name is Nitya Sevinini, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She presented a class on the Bhagavatam to the devotees in Columbus, Ohio, a couple of years ago, and I watched her wonderful presentation on an overview of the entire Bhagavatam. So if you want, I can link that in the chat later. So the story that she told was one day, the child of a rich man wanted to go out and see the world in his father's helicopter. So he went into the helicopter with the pilot and his servant, and they started to fly around for a bit until they came upon this beautiful forest. And so the boy saw the forest from the air, and he said, I want to go down and see that forest for myself. So the pilot lowered down the ladder and let him get out and explore the forest. And as he goes through the forest, wandering through the trees, he hears a low roar behind him. And he stops, and the hair on the back of his neck stands up, and he looks behind, and he sees the shadow of a huge lion coming out from behind a stand of trees. So he starts running towards a big, thick tree that he can see not too far in the distance. And he's trying to climb up as quickly as he can. He's panting, he's gasping for breath. The sweat is coming down from the fear of this lion behind him. And he climbs up onto a branch in the tree, and he's able to situate himself there. So he's a little comfortable, but it's still a branch of a tree, so it's not the nicest seat. And he's safe from the lion. He sees it down below him, and the lion's circling and looking up at him, just waiting. And as most cats do, it just calmly sits down and licks itself and stares up at the boy in the tree, knowing that eventually he'll have to come down. And the boy is there and up in the tree, and he's just escaped death. And he's looking around and he sees the forest is full of trees, beautiful trees. And a little bit further in front of him on the ground, there's what looks to be a lake. And so he thinks, oh, perhaps I can make my way across some of these trees and get down into the lake and maybe find my way around to get away from this lion. I can get into the lake. And as he's staring at the lake, he sees some shapes in the water. And he waits a little bit to see what they are. And very slowly, a few bumpy heads pop out of the water just above the surface. And he sees that there's 3 crocodiles in the water. And they notice him as well. And they start waiting patiently, as very, very ancient reptiles do. So now he can't go in the water. He can't go back down the tree. He has no idea. He's confused. What should he do? He just wanted to see this forest, and now he's stuck here. And as he's sitting there on the branch, thinking about what his next move is going to be, a little drop of honey falls on the back of his hand. He looks down at it and he smells it, tastes it. It's honey. It's delicious honey. And he looks up and he can see wedged up in the tree is a broken honeycomb. Doesn't seem to be any bees flying around, but there's honey up there. And every so often, a little bit of honey drops from that high branch onto his hand or onto his arm, wherever he's laying. And he's able to, eat the little bit of honey and feel the sweetness. And he enjoys that for a little while. And he's enjoying it. And gradually night begins to fall. And as night falls, he hears a voice over to the side from another tree. And a man's voice says, "Oh, hello. If you bump up against the branch, sometimes the honey will fall faster. If you move in a certain way, sometimes you can force the honey to come out more. In that way, you can spend your time here in the trees like me and enjoy the honey. I've been here for quite some time. I don't even remember when I first came to the trees. But this honey is very delicious, and I don't really want to leave." And so the boy shakes the tree a little bit, and this time, sure enough, 2 drops of honey fall instead of 1. And so he's excited. 2 drops is better than 1. And so he sits there and tries to shake the tree more and keeps shaking it, waiting for more honey to come down. A little bit later, he's sitting there in the tree and the sun begins to come up. And as the sun begins to rise, a loud sound of the helicopter blades starts coming up from the distance. And he sees the helicopter coming into view at the top of the tree. And he can barely hear the pilot's voice over the sound of the engines. And the pilot is saying, grab the ladder. But the boy can't really hear it. He just sees the ladder in front of him, and he doesn't know if he should reach out and grab it. The servant of his father reaches out from the helicopter and leans out towards him and puts his hand out and says, "Grab my hand. I'll help you. Take the ladder. Let's go home." And so in that story, I'm sure, as you can ascertain, the forest is the material world, right? We have left our father's home to go explore because we think there's something better here. And so we walk into the forest. The lion that first meets the boy and attempts to take him is death, right? The crocodiles in the lake are the birth, old age, and disease. And the pilot of the helicopter is the Guru Parampara. And the servant in that helicopter reaching out his hand is Prabhupada. And he's reaching out his hand and he's trying to get us to take the ladder of the Bhagavatam. The 12 cantos of the Bhagavatam are the ladder for us to go back into that helicopter, to go back to the spiritual world, to leave the forest of material existence. And so, as Gaurakumar said before we started, there's so much in the Bhagavatam. It's the perfect literature, and everything we need to go back home is here. And so we're going to look at a little bit very little bit here because there's so much. So just some things that I thought were important in the first verse of the Bhagavatam. I'm not going to read the Sanskrit here. I can never get down the rhythm right of the Bhagavatam meter. But the first line of the Bhagavatam, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, we say that before we read Bhagavatam. I didn't do that tonight in the interest, one, of time, and two, of I didn't plan on reading so many of the verses, but Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it starts off by offering obeisances to Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. Vasudevaya is the son of Vasudeva, and that's Krishna. So the beginning of this book, immediately, the author is offering his obeisances to Krishna. And then he explains that Krishna is the cause of all causes, right? Janmadi asya yato nyavad itaras charteshu, the cause of all causes, the indirect and direct cause of all causes. Not only is he the cause of all causes, but he is fully cognizant. Krishna is fully cognizant, meaning that he is always who he is now, in the past, in the future, and even before time began. Right? Abhijana Swarat. Swarat means self-sufficient or self-realized, fully realized. He is the one who imparted Vedic knowledge to the heart of Brahma. Tene Brahma, Hridaya Ya Adi Kavaye. Right? Hrida is the heart, and then Tene Brahma, to impart Vedic knowledge. In this case, the first time I read it, I thought Brahma was Brahma, but then Avikadye would be the heart, would be Brahma, because he was the firstborn. And then the great sages and demigods, even though they're so great compared to us, they're still illusioned by him, which is the Muhayanti Yat Suraya. And finally, therefore, I meditate on the absolute truth, right? Satyam Param, the absolute truth. So in this first verse, the author is not only identifying who the absolute truth is, but why he is focused on him and what the qualities of the absolute truth are. This verse could be talked about at length for hours and hours and hours, but I have a few more to get through. So that's where I'll leave the first verse at. The second and third verses of the Bhagavatam are expounding the glories of the Bhagavatam and how it's the ripened fruit of all Vedic knowledge. So the author of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, he wrote he compiled the other Vedas, and he wrote them all, and he still felt not fulfilled. And later on, we'll hear more about this from other people as we go on to the further chapters of the Bhagavatam. But Srila Vyasadeva was upset, and so his guru Narad Muni told him, "You know what? You spent all this time writing about these other things. Now you need to write something about Krishna." And this is why the Bhagavatam is considered to be the best of all Vedic literatures, because it focuses on the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a way that the others don't. And so it is the mature fruit of all Vedic knowledge. And that's the couple of lines that I highlighted here are there. Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim Vara Parye. Right? It was compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity. So he had already lived and learned and practiced Bhakti Yoga for so many years, lifetimes even. And now he's presenting the Bhagavatam. In verses 4 and 5, we learn about the location, the purpose, the audience, and the speaker of the Bhagavatam. So the location is Naimishrayana. Now, I always pronounce it wrong. Naimishrayana, which is a great forest. And I had a note on this, but I don't remember exactly. But there's a text which says that Brahma, after he created the universe, he envisioned a wheel surrounding the entire universe. And the center, the hub of the wheel was Naimishrayana. So it was literally the center of the created universe. And so it became a very, very important place for the great sages to go for sacrifices and other rituals. So they assembled here in this forest just at the beginning-ish of Kali Yuga. The sages saw how awful this age would be and how difficult it would be for people to learn how to go back home, to go back to Godhead, and how the literatures before the Bhagavatam, how they were so complex and so complicated that many people in Kali Yuga wouldn't be able to study them, much less memorize them, in order to go back home. And so they wanted to perform these sacrifices here in the forest to mainly to appease Vishnu, because Vishnu is the object of all sacrifices. Krishna is the one who enjoys everything. And so in offering sacrifices for the pleasure of Vishnu, they were hoping to give some boon to the people of Kali Yuga. And Sutta Goswami was invited to speak at this gathering of all these great sages who were headed by Shaunaka Rishi. And so Sutta Goswami, as I mentioned in the beginning, he is the one he was a great sage who was present at the original conversation between Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami. And so in his vast knowledge and experience, he remembered every single detail that was spoken that day. And he came so that the sages could ask him questions and he could retell that story. And that is what is written down in the Srimad Bhagavatam for us today to have, because there's so much that's been condensed into a way that we can understand now in Kali Yuga. Verses 6, 7, and 8, we have the stage set. We know who's there. The speaker's been presented, and now the author is going to give us some of Sutta Goswami's qualities. He's a Goswami, so he's free from vice. He has perfect control of his senses. He knows every single Veda, Purana, all the literature inside and out. And he is situated in the line of disciplic succession. And so here we have an ultimately qualified speaker who is going to tell us about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is all set up within the first 8 verses of the first chapter of the first canto. We haven't even gotten into any of the details yet, and we already have such a foundation of how to understand, right? Because if you are listening submissively to a qualified speaker, you can understand. And so Sutta Goswami's qualities are outlined in those 3 verses. And then the majority of this chapter is focused on the questions that the sages ask. And they have 6 primary questions. The first question they ask is, what is the absolute good or the ultimate benefit for the people in the age of Kali? The second question is, what is the essence of all scripture? As I mentioned before, right, all the Vedas that have preceded the Srimad Bhagavatam, all the Puranas, there's so much literature. And for a person of our time who only lives for 100 or so years, if we're lucky, it would be almost impossible to read all of those literatures and understand them and be able to have success in life, because there's just not enough time. So what is the essence of all scriptures? They're asking Sutta Goswami to bring it down to a level that we can understand. And of course, there are some people today that are incredibly realized souls, far superior to anything I can ever hope to be. But I'm very grateful that Sutta Goswami was able to tell us this in a much more condensed form. The third question, why did Krishna appear in the womb of Devaki? Right? We started in the beginning by giving our obeisances to the son of Vasudeva, who is Krishna. So why did he come in the womb of Devaki? Question number 4 and question number 5 it took me a little bit to parse these out, because if you read the text, they seem very similar. But the question 4, what are the transcendental acts of the Lord's incarnations? And question 5, what are the pastimes of the Lord's incarnations? The difference in Prabhupada's translation of those two verses lends itself, from what I understand, that other more learned devotees have described, that the first question is about the Purusha avatars. So like the Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, Kashura Dokashaya Vishnu, the Paramatma, like what are those incarnations of Krishna doing in the material world, and what have they done outside of the material world to create it? And then question 5 is about the incarnations that are present within the world. So like Narasimha and Krishna and oh my goodness, I can't think of the dwarf's name. Vamana? Not Vamana.
Vamana, yeah.
Vamana, it is Vamana, okay. So all of those. So those two questions are very similar, but they're about different types of incarnations. And then finally, question 6, now that Krishna has gone back to Swadham, to Krishna Loka, where does Dharma reside? Where do the religious principles reside now that he has left the earth? And so these 6 questions are answered by Sutta Goswami throughout the first 2 cantos. Well, in the first canto, but they go on and on and on throughout the Bhagavatam, and they're answered in various ways. And again, we can spend hours dissecting each of these questions. But as a brief overview, this is kind of the meat or the heart of the first chapter. These 6 questions, which form the basis for the sages in their questioning of Sutta Goswami, and through the stories and the retelling of the conversation between Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, we get even more and more details about these answers and these questions. So Canto 1, Chapter 1 is, as I mentioned in the beginning, is setting the stage for what we're going to listen to. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the Bhagavatam is a conversation. And the speaker of the Bhagavatam is there to answer questions. And that is a conversation. There needs to be a back and a forth. And sometimes for me, when I'm listening to classes, it's hard for me to ask questions because there's so much I don't know that I am sometimes kind of paralyzed in the sense that I don't know if I should ask this question or if that question is not relevant because there's things that I don't even know that I can ask. So researching this has been a good reminder for me that there are no bad questions. And if a question is asked with respect and in humility, and you are ready to just listen to the answer that comes to you, you can make progress. So one last thing before we go into questions. Gaurakumar asked us to have some kind of practical application for the verses that we were covering. And I struggled with this for a bit because I felt like chapter 1 was very abstract in a way. You know, it talks a lot about how to it talks a lot about what's coming and how to be respectful in asking these questions, but I couldn't piece out something that would seem like a practical piece of advice or a specific verse to take away from. So I was talking to my wife about this, and she recommended that I share something about my own personal journey in bhakti. Because for her, when she hears people's stories, that allows her to connect more with the message. So for me, Bhakti Yoga has started over the last 5 or 6 years. When I was younger, I was raised as a Christian in the church, Christian church, and even though Christianity, you have Jesus and there's a personal God in a way, it was still very much, at least when I was being raised, it was very much about fearing God and trying to do good things so that God wouldn't be angry at you. And after I got to be a teenager, I wasn't having anything to do with that because that didn't make any sense to me. I also didn't understand how you could only get one chance to like do everything right, otherwise you went to hell. So it didn't work for me. So I rebelled a lot as a teenager against that religion and my parents. I felt like I knew better than everybody. I felt like I was smarter than everybody, that these people were wasting their time. My parents in particular were wasting their time because, why would if a God existed, why would he give you these rules that would then send you to hell if you didn't do everything perfectly? So I wasn't having anything to do with that. And then right around when I turned 17, my father passed away. He died actually in church. He was an usher in the church, and he worked with a lot of different ministries in church. But every Sunday he would be there to assist with the service, and he was very, 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 very. I hesitate to say religious, but he was very focused on his church services, and he loved God, and I see that now. At the time, I didn't know that. So he passed away in church, and immediately following that, I was very angry at God, even though I didn't believe in him at the time. And now that that irony is not lost on me, but at the time I didn't see it. And so I had even more of a reason not to believe in God, because he had, my father died in church. How could this be possible? Like, what God lets his people die in the church? And so I was very angry for many years, and I would go out of my way to be really rude to people who were religious in any way, any religion. I would deride and just, have very contrary things to say anytime anything religious was brought up. And it lasted a long time. It really wasn't until probably I was in my 30s before I started to have a different opinion about God. As the world got worse, has become worse as I get older, and as I realized that the material things that have made me happy in the past, it's temporary, and there has to be something more. And I didn't know what it was or how to look for it at the time. And it wasn't until my wife, until Andrea, one day she found the devotees in the New York City subway. She heard the Harinam and she followed the sound, and she started to go to Gita classes at 26 2nd Avenue. And there she met a lot of amazing people. Two of them are here. We met them at well, not 26 2nd Avenue, but after we went to 26th Avenue for a bit, we started to go to the Bhakti Center, and there we met Gaur Kumar and Nietzsche. Andrea was doing service there as the Sunday school teacher for a little while. And my first interaction with 26 2nd Avenue was when she would bring home prasadam after the classes, and that food was really good. And so for me, the way into Krishna consciousness was through prasadam. And the little mercies every Saturday night when she would come back with plates and plates of food. I'd like to meet those people. Maybe I'll go down with you once and see a class and listen to the speakers. And in 26 2nd Avenue, I had the privilege to hear from so many exalted personalities like Chandrasekhar Swami and Jayadvaita Swami, Bhakti Vasudev, like so many, Ramapad Swami, so many people. And little by little, I would listen and listen and listen, and the things that I was hearing made sense. And I think the second thing that clicked for me after the food was that this wasn't just a book. Like, again, not I don't want to speak badly about any religion. It wasn't just a book. This was an entire library of knowledge, a science, right? Vedic science of bhakti yoga, and being exposed to that little by little and thinking about it and hearing about it and reading it, it started to make a lot of sense to me. And when Andrea got really sick, I prayed, Krishna, what can I do? And this is me, an atheist, praying to Krishna, saying, what can I do to, in this situation? There's nothing I can do. There has to be something more, like, what's going to happen? And I realized at that time, my purpose in life is to serve Krishna's devotees. And in this case, the devotee that I serve is my wife. And my purpose is to help her bring her art and her teachings to the kids, to make, the next generation able to carry on Prabhupada's work. And I may not, I may not be able to, I don't know, do everything myself, but I can help her. And it was very clear to me in that moment when she was really sick, and we didn't know what was going on and what was going to happen. But from that time, this was around, I think 2018 or so. She'll know exactly the date, but I realized that was my purpose. And I think that understanding the ultimate good, becoming closer to Krishna, those are things for me that struck out to me. So sharing prasadam with people when you can. Sometimes I'll make cookies in the house and we'll give them to our next door neighbors. Or I'll go, we have a devotee down here who has a bakery. So sometimes I'll go out and buy some donuts and give them to the neighbors. And also, Gaur Kumar shared a piece of wisdom with me many, many, many years ago, it feels like, even though it wasn't that many. But he's been such an amazing person. And his saying of being a guide on the side and not a stage on the stage on the stage is so important. There's so many opportunities for me to be negative to people, but being an example of someone who practices Krishna consciousness without trying to, ram it down people's throats, I think is more important for me to try to share it with people than being that stage, like I know everything. Because now, as an adult, I'll be 40 in 2 months. I can definitely see that my teenage self was, as Prabhupada would say, puffed up and a bit of a rascal. So the message here, I think, and a practical application of the Bhagavatam and of getting closer to Krishna is just be yourself, but be yourself as Krishna sees you. And probably my favorite verse out of anything that I've read so far is from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Harinama, Harinama, Harinama eva kevalam, Kaula nastyeva, 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 gatya anyata. In this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is the chanting of the holy names of the Lord. There is no other way. There is no other way. There is no other way. And the more we see all these things happening in the world, we need more and more people to be chanting. So thank you. And please, if there are any questions or corrections, chastisements, I'm happy to try and answer them and receive them. Hare Krishna.
There is no chastisements, no corrections, but thank you for being a guide on the side and taking us all through this journey of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1. That was beautiful. The outline, the theme, the practical application. I think you very nicely outlined the whole chapter for us. and the way you presented the first, second, third verse, and then the 6 questions of the sages of Naimisharanya. I just want to share a couple of slides just to illustrate certain points that you made, Paul, if that's okay.
Please.
So the first one is, just bear with me. Do you see my slide?
Yep.
So the first thing that Paul was mentioning was about this one person who's lost in the forest, and he was running from the lion, and he climbed the tree. So this actually comes in, so Vidura is actually mentioning this to Dhritarashtra. It comes in the Mahabharata in the Stri Parva, it's called, the particular section where this comes. So very nicely, I mean, he describes to Dhritarashtra, who is not willing to listen to him even at that point, that this elephant is like our Purva Janma Karma, which means our past karmas, like this elephant is pulling this tree, and the snakes are the future karmas, or the future coming karma. And then this white and black rats are like day and night, and they're actually biting the branch that he's holding on to, which means slowly, this is like time, slowly but surely, death is coming. And this is where he mentions that the Lord comes and gives his hand, and here's the honeybee, the honeycomb, the beehive, and from where the honey is dripping, and he's drinking that, and he's thinking that he's happy. Actually, he's thinking that he's very blissful, and the Lord is actually showing his hand and saying, "Come, come," but still he's so engrossed in tasting that honey, the pleasures, the small pleasures of this world, that he forgets the imminent danger that is from all sides around him. And so that's the first thing I wanted to share. And the second thing I wanted to share was the place where the Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken. You very nicely mentioned, Paul, that so Lord Brahma, he actually released his Sudarshan Chakra, and it actually landed in this particular place. It actually made a hole in the center of earth, it is mentioned. And this is the place where the Naimisharanya, this is the place in the forest of Naimisharanya where the Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken by Suta Goswami to the sages of Naimisharanya. I just wanted to share these 2 pictures because today is our first class. So thank you, Paul. Anyone else has any questions, comments, thoughts? We'll be following the same theme going forward. And if possible, I want to request everyone to read the next chapter. So I will send the link today itself. So please read chapter 2. Chapter 2 is one of the best chapters in the first canto. I mean, every chapter is special, but it's a wonderful chapter with so many amazing verses. Srila Prabhupada especially quoted this, the verses in this chapter several times. Even on the Jaladuta, he actually quoted a section of these verses from this chapter. So, and His Grace Sumon Prabhu will be covering that next week. So while we are speaking, so Nitya is actually going to be taking notes, and she's going to be putting it in the Google Sheet that I shared with you. So she'll be putting the summary of the class, the theme, and the practical application. So we'll be doing this. So by the end of May, when we complete this, we can all go back and read everything together and get a good understanding of the whole 19 chapters of this first canto. So thank you all so much. If anybody has any comments, please unmute and speak. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Paul Prabhu. This was amazing, especially the realization that you shared. It is very profound because bhakti as a philosophy is very good, but then how we apply it actually will matter the most when it comes to us achieving love of God. So, and you've been following the perfect example of Das Dasanudas. You're trying to serve the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, which is actually the essence of Lord Chaitanya's philosophy. And yeah, very nicely you summarize the entire first chapter. And yeah, and your verse recitation is amazing as well. So yeah, but I think for me personally, the best part would be the realizations that you shared, how you came to the conclusion that, after hearing all the great souls that you mentioned, how you came to the conclusion that you need to serve, you need to support Mataji in her services, and that's how I'd heard that um, sometimes when we see a devotee advance, and when that brings happiness to us, and when we assist that devotee in advancing further, sometimes we actually that gives us more advancement, that pleases Krishna actually much more than doing the actual seva itself. I mean, of course, not to minimize the actual seva, but that's the attitude that is emphasized, the attitude of serving the servant. So yeah, thank you very much, Prabhu. Really nectarian class. Thank you.
Jai. Vinay Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Paul Prabhu, Dandavats. It was so soothing and lucid like presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed each and everything you said, and especially the part you spoke about your personal realizations and how you came to Krishna consciousness. It really touched me. Suddenly I remembered from Prabhupada Lilamrita and from Abhay Charan series, like how happy Prabhupada used to feel when he was in like staying in 26th Avenue, and some person used to visit him, like, and they were like getting into Krishna consciousness. So like I felt your story like that, you coming into contact with Bhakti Center. Certainly this must be like making Srila Prabhupada very happy, that the way you have like become part of the Bhakti community and embraced it so nicely. And like as you told at one time, you didn't wanted to believe in like just so-called religiosity, but now you are like into the science of Krishna consciousness. It's really inspiring, and I'm really touched. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Vinay Prabhu.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak?
Rajiv posted in the class was so amazing, Paul, Prabhuji. I really loved the class, and it was so soothing. Every statement was like gold, and the chapter was summarized so well. I love the story about the helicopter in the forest, and especially loved hearing about your personal experience. It really inspired, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. I thank you, Rajiv. Andrea will be very happy to hear that you all like the story, because I told her, I was like, I don't know if I can tell a story about myself. I don't see how that's going to be relevant, but she was very right. And I'm very glad I listened to her. And I'm very glad that you all got something out of it. Yeah, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Paul Prabhu. Thank you so much for the, very, intriguing and very interesting. You made it very interesting, because it's not easy to summarize the whole chapter into half an hour or 40 minutes of class. But you made it really interesting by starting with your own personal story. That was really nice segue into how the first 30 years of life that you mentioned, to give a background, and how you got introduced to Krishna consciousness. It was really nice to hear that, and also your practical application. So I was actively taking notes, so because I'm supposed to be doing the summary part. So I loved every single bit of it. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Shreya Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Paul Prabhu. Thank you so much for this class. I felt like you set the stage for the upcoming weeks really well. And your personal realizations really touched me. I am relatively new to Krishna consciousness. So any personal story kind of makes me connect a little bit more. And I truly appreciate for you to share all of this with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shreya Mataji. So I noticed that you've also entered your name in the list. Thank you for doing that. So you'll be covering how Parikshit received the age of Kali. So there are a few more devotees. Vinay Prabhu, Sindhu Kanya Mataji, you all need to enter your names in that Google Sheet, please, whenever you get a chance, so that we'll know who the upcoming speakers are. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone. If there are no more comments, we can end now. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyo cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai.
Jai.
Prabhupada ki jai. His Grace Paul Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone.